So welcome, everybody. And today we're going to talk about getting started with shared services. So my clicker doesn't work. There it is. There it is. All righty. So we're going to talk about getting started with shared services. So I wonder if I go back over here, if there's a camera here. There's not. I don't know. You may not see me. You may just hear me if you're on Zoom, but that's okay. Might even be better. So at Opportunities Exchange, we are really committed to these core values. We talk a lot about the business of childcare, but really what's at the heart of it is good practice and giving kids and families the things that they need, and also making sure that the workforce has what they need. So these are our core values that drive us, that every director deserves an administrative team. That person, well, usually a woman, that person shouldn't have to carry all of the pedagogy and all of the business work on their shoulders alone, right? They deserve to have support. Every teacher deserves pedagogical leadership. They deserve to have someone who is supporting them, whether they're in a classroom or a home-based setting. Where are they getting their opportunities to reflect on their practice, to think about what they're doing, and to think about ways to improve and better serve the children in their care? And then every child deserves a reflective teacher. So those are our core values. I don't have to tell you this because we've all lived through it, and we're still kind of racing ahead of it. I think we might have gotten a little window for this conference, fingers crossed, but we're getting through. So we really understood the challenges, those of us who work in the field, before the pandemic. What happened during the pandemic was the rest of the world got to see the challenges sort of playing out in public. And so that's kind of what's given us this incredible opportunity. But we need to really make sure that we use the opportunity to rebuild the system, to remake and reinvent the system. So we know that there are some of the doorways for those opportunities are in some of these, what we call game changers, sometimes automation and business coaching, getting to administrative scale, really understanding real-time supply and demand, and really beyond real-time supply and demand, understanding what's going on out in the field, because for the most part, people who have money and make decisions about the rules, like at the state level and the federal level, they don't really understand what's happening in the field in real time. So it's about supply and demand, but it's about so much more. How do we get information? We usually send out a survey, right? And say, tell us about, and then, whoever answers the question, and it's not good, and we've got to change. So in shared services, we're trying to focus on system issues. We're trying to build infrastructure at the local level, understand more about what works and what doesn't, and then apply those lessons to make the system better. You've probably seen this before. If you're at a shared service conference, you've seen this slide before, but shared services helps us get to administrative scale. And you know about the Iron Triangle. Does anybody not know about the Iron Triangle? Okay, then I'll talk about it for a second. So what we mean, this is a Louise Stoney has coined this phrase. And what it means is that in order to be a sustainable business, you've got to do these three things every day. You've got to keep your classroom or your program. You've got to keep your program fully enrolled. You've got to collect all the money that's owed to you, whether that's from private tuition or from subsidy or from other sources. You've got to be on top of collections, and you've got to understand your cost at a pretty detailed level. And so if you're running a center, you have to understand, what are my costs in the baby room? What are my costs in the preschool room? What's my unit cost in school age, right? And that's all pretty complicated stuff. And if you're a home provider, it's not so much about your cost, because a lot of your costs are like your overhead, your home. So really, when we talk about home-based care, what we mean is you've got to have enough revenue to make sure you can do this work every day and keep doing it and not sacrifice your family's well-being and your own well-being. So someday we'll find the right language that will fit in a little box for that family childcare one.
For family childcare, it's about them paying themselves.
Yeah.
That's really what it is.
It is about them paying. So, you know, in a home-based setting, what that means is, you know, you have to have an expectation that the families are going to pay consistently and regularly. And what do you do if they don't? Making decisions about that, right? It's also about the rates that you charge. So lots more to unpack, but, and then tax prep is pretty important. So record keeping for home-based providers. And then there's a lot of ways and a lot of levels of intensity in shared services, but what we've certainly learned over the years is that the more sort of entry-level light touch is helpful, but it's not transformative. The deeper you go and the more deeply you're embedding these services and the more you're changing the way the business model works, the more you're going to transform the system. So this is actually all a precursor. And what I want to get to, these are some examples, is this little stop sign. Because shared services has kind of become popular. I don't know if you've noticed, but some of the language in the CCDBG guidance talks about shared services being an option for states to build into their plans. A lot of states have talked about shared services, but shared services mean something different depending on who you talk to. And so what we've started to understand at OppEx is that we need to have a conversation about what it is we're trying to do here. And so I would say the fundamental problem is, or the fundamental question is, what problem are we trying to solve? And we've got to get really specific about that. How many of you are in the process of planning or launching a shared services project? Most people, okay. So I will say that, so I hope that what we're going to talk about today is helpful. And even if you've already launched, this is an ongoing issue and question. Always really staying focused on what is it, what problem are we trying to solve? And what that question does is it takes us out of ourselves, right? As nonprofit people, especially, you know, we're not all nonprofit, but most of us are nonprofit. We have a tendency to say, like when we write a grant proposal, what do? We talk about all the things that we're going to do, right? We're going to offer a training a month, and we're going to go visit people, and then we're going to do this, and we're going to raise more money and start a toy bank, and then we're going to do this. We talk about all the things that we're going to do, and we measure our success in whether or not we delivered those services. And what I want to do is encourage you to flip that on its head and say, what's the outcome? What's the impact of this work that you're doing? And one of the questions that people wrestle with often in the very beginning is, how much is this going to cost? And I have a grant right now, but are people going to be willing to pay for this when my grant money goes away? Well, if you're not delivering a service that's worth what you need to charge, then you shouldn't be doing the work in the first place. So anyway, we'll get there. So, so how might you answer that question? So throw some things out on the table for us. Just let's brainstorm for a minute. What are some of the problems in early childhood that we might look to try to solve through a shared service alliance?
Staffing.
What was that?
Staffing.
Staffing. And in particular, what about staffing?
The lack of staffing.
The lack of staffing. Have you noticed?
I mean,
so I just cannot go through this conference without saying this, and that is that we have struggled and what's the word? Gazed at our navels and pulled out our hair and done all of these things to talk about minimum wage. Guess what? Minimum wage in this country is now $15 an hour. You know how I know that? Because McDonald's is paying $15 an hour in almost every place. So why do we think somebody would do incredibly hard work? I mean, we know some of them would because they're dedicated and this is their passion, right? But the floor has been raised, people. And if we're here at a much higher minimum wage. And So we've got to get there as a floor and then we've got to go up from there. But yeah, so the lack of staffing and compensation, what are some other problems that we want to try to,
Profitability.
okay, so say more about access.
Access, like childcare deserts, more quality access.
Okay.
Quality care and education.
Increasing the number of
slots.
slots and quality slots.
Yep.
Absolutely. What else?
Flexibility, slim profit margin.
Yeah,
How do we support them with business support service?
Right.
Gets them to a better financial position.
absolutely. I just have to say that I love the fact that today Rian talked about three things in all. Every time she talked about compensation, health benefits and retirement, I am so there because, and part of the reason I'm so there is because I'm 60, gonna be 64 years old. And I was fortunate that, early enough in the work that I did as an AUIC director. So, I wasn't rich, right? But in the work that I did really early, I sort of got the message about compound interest and you need to save, start saving early and save a little bit. So I was able to put money away. And I just about forced all of my employees to do it also. I think they're probably, as they age, I think they're probably happy about that. I think about the fact that so many people in this field have worked for decades and never had the opportunity to save for retirement. And it breaks my heart because they poured themselves out for children. And now what? Are they going to live on Social Security? We have to change that. I'm sorry. I don't, maybe 2 or 3 of you might know this about me. I'm an early childhood person. I'm also an ordained Baptist minister, so I have a tendency to go into preacher mode. Really sorry, and I'll try. We have 2 more hands. Tell me 2 more problems.
Demand on providers' time to be able to attend to their business and try to automate.
Yep. So Iowa, my good friend Jeff and I meet every week online because OppEx is working with Iowa. Iowa did a survey of home-based providers, and the average home-based provider works a 70-hour work week. And some work more than that. So that's not sustainable. That's something's gonna break. We had one more.
I was gonna say time too.
Yeah.
Time to get an education.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because you're working full time and you have to go to school, and what about student teaching?
Yeah.
Like I couldn't close my family childcare in order to go to college and student teach. So
Yeah.
we have to make pathways for those too.
Absolutely.
I think one of the big things for me is moving the field from compliance to the science.
Okay, so I want you to take that idea and think about that as a problem, right? Okay, so how could shared services help? What kinds of things could you do to address that problem?
Having the right, do you want me to answer that?
Well, just in 2 sentences, because I'm gonna give you a chance to practice.
I think coaching.
Okay,
Access to professional development.
okay, good.
I have one more, and it's related to what you said, is fully costing what the price tag is for care.
Yeah.
So if I'm working 70 hours a week, I need to cost those 70 hours. And I think that there's so many costs that when you talk to a provider, they don't know that that's actually it's a real cost. And that's why shared services is so hard to sell, is because I'll just work 80 hours and I won't pay that extra money. So I think that really getting down to the nuts and bolts of a framework within which we can push people that actually cost what they're putting into their
To really
business,
see that. Yeah, that's a good point.
is part of what shared services could do.
Yep.
And then there's the whole next thing of selling them to say, how about you live a work-life balanced life?
Exactly.
In exchange for this. So
Yes.
Every time I'm in here, the cost of quality and really costing out those 70 hours instead of letting that slide is really where the real conversation.
So interesting. In the early 90s, when I was at DeBasey, one of the first things we did was we worked with the Center for the Child Care Workforce, which has a slightly different name now, but you know who I mean, Marcy Whitebook and folks. And we did a salary survey for home-based providers. It was really low. This was in the early 90s. So I actually found I found a whole bunch of cassette tapes as I was kind of organizing, getting ready for retirement, because I really am going to retire next year, despite what Louise Stoney thinks. So I was listening to a cassette tape of a radio program that I did in like 92 or 93, right after we had done the salary survey. First of all, I sounded really young. I don't know how that happens. And then, but it was interesting because what we found was, I think providers then were making like $5 or $6 an hour, except that would have been based on a 40-hour work week.
Yeah,
When you actually divided by the numbers, they were making like $250 an hour. So some of it is just highlighting the real numbers, right? So what I want to say about that, do you want to jump in, Joe?
Yes, providers don't know how to pay their
Yeah.
salaries and setting up a foundation before they get started.
Yeah. So as you get very granular about these problems, it kind of creates a pathway for what the services could and should be, right? So let's talk about that. So the theory of change is just a roadmap, a project roadmap that helps you get really clear. How do you like my animation in that? That was pretty cool, huh? About what you're trying to achieve. So if you don't know the destination, any road will do, right? Again, we're going to stop thinking about what we could provide, and we're going to get really focused on what the problem is. And there, by the way, there's never just one problem, right? And you could do a really good job of solving. You might decide that you want to solve a problem that's a little bit on the easier side first, because you're trying to build community, because you're trying to build trust, but then you keep your eye on what's the next thing. So being crystal clear about the problem. So effective networks have a laser focus on provider outcomes, the services needed to achieve those outcomes, and a way to collect data to measure the progress. Those are critically important. So I'm going to give you an example. Compensation. Sort of been my life's work, so I had to go with this one. So what if we're trying to solve teacher compensation? Now, this model is for a center, right? There's going to be a slightly different version for a home-based setting. But let's just talk about what this might look like if I were going to do a shared services for center. And by the way, this is loaded in your app. So I appreciate that you're taking pictures. You might be taking pictures of me though. Maybe I'm short selling myself. Feel free to post on Facebook if they look good. But so you'll have this whole PowerPoint, right? Yeah. So what if we're trying to solve teacher compensation? So we can look at this, read it from front to back either way, but I'll just start at the top. So some of our strategies might be that we're going to use a childcare management system. And so one important step is going to be onboarding providers to using software that will help them with the financial management of their program. Another step is going to be business coaching. I'm going to make sure that not only have my providers set up all of the family records, set up electronic billing, done all of that work. Now I'm going to show them how to pull down reports and look at and monitor on a regular basis what their bad debt is, where their openings in their program, where they're anticipated. Now I'm going to use this technology and apply strong business principles to be able to manage my program. This is a group of centers, so I'm going to figure out how to access HR supports. It might be that I'm in a large organization that has an HR department. And so I can take the resources that are available and make those and extend those out to the centers in my program. It might be that I find an HR firm, I'm trying to think of one of the ones that advertises. There's a whole bunch now that talk about that. Have you heard any of them? They're aimed at small businesses. And it's like, don't struggle with HR on your own. Hire us and we'll, for $100 a month will come and do this or whatever. That's a shared service approach, right? So there are lots of different ways to provide the HR supports, but I recognize that I'm going to need to provide some of these HR supports. So it might be around benefits, it might be around recruitment, might be around supports as a strategy. And then I'm also going to create a subpool. Now, how are these things going to get me to better compensation? So here's what I'm trying to accomplish. These are my short-term targets. So the first thing is when a lot of these administrative tasks are being done with software versus a person, I'm going to have lower administrative overhead costs. Now, I'm only going to have lower administrative costs if I have less people on my payroll walking around collecting attendance sheets, right? So I can tell you that I can lower my administrative overhead, but I have to be willing to make some changes in how my program operates. We'll talk more about that later. But there is a possibility that I can reduce my overhead costs. If I can do that, I may be able to take some of those savings and invest them in teacher salaries. So instead of having 1.5 FTEs on my payroll right now, who cost me a combined salary of $75,000, I can now reduce that to 0.2 FTE. And by the way, I'm not making that up. If you're really not doing all of this, think about food program. If you're doing food program on paper versus electronically, we're talking about 1 or 2 days a week of paperwork versus, I'm talking about First Center now, right? Paperwork versus maybe 2 hours if you're doing all of this digitally. So you can have a dramatic impact on how much money you're spending. And I can bring that, let's say I have a savings of $60,000. I can now go in and look at my payroll, my teacher salary scales, and begin to figure out how to do some increases in base wages. So there is absolutely an impact. I can increase the director's time. So if I have programs where the director is doing a lot of this paperwork, that director may never be able to get out of the office to go in and support teachers in the classroom with observation and feedback and meaningful supports. That makes a big difference in how happy people feel in their jobs. And then this subpool may give me an opportunity to give people paid planning time. I think there are some things that are so fundamental that we have accepted as a field that are just absolutely untenable. And one of them is that we expect people to be on the floor, whether it's your living room floor or whether it's on the floor of the classroom. We expect people to be on the floor full-time with kids. And if you are running a center, you have to give them a 15-minute break every 4 hours and you have to give them lunch. It could be paid or unpaid. But every other moment of the day is on working with kids. Maybe the kids nap and maybe you could say they do their planning time then, but we can't keep doing that and we can't keep accepting. And that helps lead to burnout. So these things are all really interrelated. And I think, so those are our targets. So what are our long-term outcomes? We're going to look for lower staff turnover. Is this really having an impact on how long people stay working in my program and how much turnover I have to deal with? It may mean that I can recruit stronger candidates because I have a much better workplace, right? It probably will mean that my teachers, the combination of having better and more focused supervision and having time to actually reflect is going to give me more reflective practice in my program, which is really what this is all about. And ultimately better child outcomes. Does that make sense? Let me stop and get your feedback, thoughts, ideas. I don't know if I have chat, but let me see if I have chat. And to our Zoom audience, I really apologize that I can't take chat questions because it looks like I'll mess up my screen. Anyway, I'm happy to answer your questions by email when I get back. So, but any thoughts from folks in the room? You're very quiet.
I'd say where it gets really complex is that a lot of these are connected. And
They are.
it's easy sometimes to outsource a particular function,
Yeah,
but to be able to teach somebody how these data points matter to quality, that's where it gets really complicated and the systems are connected.
yeah, absolutely. That's why I think we have to write these things out and we have to connect the dots and help people to connect the dots and see, why are you doing this, right?
I mean, I think obviously in the theory of change, you have your whole assumptions section, right? And I think there's some assumptions and kind of readiness, right? We know that some of these providers have been working for a very long time in a certain way. And so really making sure that we're taking the time to really invest in change management and like walking them through and coaching them through the process. So like I see, and we work in my organization, we work with family childcare providers or educators. And so the onboarding to the CCMS thing, I'm like, no, that like it just wouldn't work. We have to start with digital coaching. Like let's get you comfortable with digital literacy and all the tools first, and then we can work on all the other things later. But I think change management is a huge portion of a lot of this. It's scary. It's super scary for folks to go through these processes that are foreign, and they know that changes are gonna happen, and they make good and bad. So I think that's a huge part of all of this work. Recognizing that.
That you cannot say that strongly enough or often enough. I happen to be a person who loves change. And I will change things even when I don't have to, because I just like change. I know that I'm in the minority. I know that a lot of people are really resistant. So I think that's incredibly important. I will push back a little bit on the technology piece. Because I hear vastly different things. About half the people that I work with say exactly what you're saying, which is that providers are really reluctant. They're really nervous about technology. I also know that the vast majority of people in this country now use smartphone technology all the time, and almost all of the software apps are mobile friendly and mobile first. And if you have, if you use Facebook, if you can pay a bill online, well, some of them may not pay bills online. If you can chat, if you can do some of those things, I think we're more tech savvy than we give ourselves credit for.
I completely agree with you. And I didn't say reluctance. I said fear.
Okay.
There's a fear.
Okay.
Like I can use, like our providers, and particularly we serve a large portion here in Texas of Spanish speaking providers.
Yeah.
They love WhatsApp. They can use WhatsApp all day. When you ask them to log into their email, they're like, let me call my daughter. Mihal, what's my password?
Yeah.
Right. And then, they get locked out and all this stuff. So I think it's not about reluctance. It's about not having the experience and the knowledge base
Okay.
and all of that so it's that on ramp to say, okay, let's start. Okay, you can use WhatsApp.
Yeah.
Let's transfer some of those skills into this next platform and then the next, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's not reluctance. It's just like, having exposure and fear of the new and unknown.
Yeah. So even you and your theory of change, you would want to put a step before that.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm with you. I agree. Yeah, Bill.
Just a little bit of context. I mean, we started with the same thing. And they were part of that is the parents who the providers are supporting may not have that technical expertise. There was a report that came out in the fall by OECD. I think roughly 15% of the American working population can't do basic email. Look at the sections of the professions, education is over double digits. It's like 10 or 12% of the people in the education workforce can't do basic email. So there's still a high part of the population that this is still foreign to them.
So what I was going to say a second ago was I hear sort of two very different stories, right? On the one hand, there is no question that there is a slice of the population among both providers and families that are not really engaged in the digital space. I get that. But the vast majority are. And again, it's like, we have to help people understand that we've been greatly helped by mobile technology, by, just the customer interface stuff. But the other thing that people tell me is their parents can't wait because they pay every other bill online, because they can get really regular, consistent pictures of their kids in a secure space. They can see, like, there are so many benefits to it that I think you're going to find, I think we do find that there's both. There's going to be a whole group that just really can't wait to get to this. And then there are those folks that we're going to have to help get there. But it's a huge part of your work.
But then there's a third part to that, because there are still large swaths of places in the nation that don't have access to internet, to reliable, broadband.
Yeah.
So then you have a whole nother compounded place, and those tend to be where your childcare deserts are.
Yes, and there is good news, because the infrastructure bill has an enormous investment in bringing sort of, it's like the equivalent of electrification in the 1930s. So I think in a couple of years, it will be much better. But yeah, it's a barrier. So, yeah.
One of the things that I think is an interesting strategy to maybe consider is this idea that providers, this idea of engagement, right? So this idea that providers have to choose to do these things in an environment where they are often being flooded with information and try this strategy. So I feel like there's this need across the country to help providers. Who is the conduit of the messaging to get them to understand this and how it's going to help them live their bottom line, their quality of life, to really help them to make this rise to the top of their email inbox, of their mind, of their daily priorities.
The message was someone like Jolita.
Absolutely.
Well, I was gonna say something to add to Dr. Teresa's comment and strategies. It's also, it goes deeper than that, as well as meeting them where they are as well, and also a mindset shift as well. So why is it important to use technology? Because your business will be better for it. And so teaching them those business practices and that foundation and so that will also help with the strategies and to address all the other issues, especially in the family childcare population. Because we're always told we didn't get into this field to make money. It's always a negative connotation to a family childcare business. It's not negative. It needs to be spoken and talked in a different way.
I 100% agree with you. I hate the fact that we sort of accept that if you're going to be a home-based provider, you're not going to make any money.
Yeah, I know.
I hate that. And that's not okay. So I am totally with you. So speaking of messaging, I think that's really important. So I wanted to share some screenshots from a couple of projects that have worked on this messaging, right? So this was a project in, this first one over here, Rasa, was a project in Richmond, Virginia. And, it's really interesting because this is the first time that I actually saw data being collected that showed why there were 3 childcare programs that started in this project, and each one of them struggled with some slightly different issues. But in one of the projects, there were 3 or 4 things once we started collecting financial data that really flew off the page. Like, if you could fix this and this and this, you could probably be sitting on about $150,000 in new revenue for your program. And they would not do it. They would not make the change. They wouldn't reduce administrative staff because people had been on the payroll a long time and they were loyal. They wouldn't think about consolidating classrooms to get their enrollment up to 95. And they just would not. Those are 2 things right off the top of my head. I have nightmares about this. And so I was working with the shared services director, and I said, well, you got to go talk to the board, because if the executive director is resisting to this extent, it's the board's responsibility to do something about this. And they talked to the board, and the board said, oh yeah, Thank you for the information. And so I know that people will sometimes not change, even when the evidence is hitting them over the head. I know that. But one of the 3 programs did make the changes. And what happened was, well, I think I have the slide later on. So, but I'll just tell you, this was from their brochure. So this was their value proposition. Spend more time engaging with teachers, children, and families. Let us tackle the administrative tasks. Now, also in their brochure, they had numbers that showed what the results were. They had right out of the gate, they had freed up like $52,000 in resources just by, first of all, they got regulated. They were a legally unregulated program. In Virginia, you can be a faith-based program. So that once they got licensed, their subsidy rate went way up. They were an excellent program, but they had to go through the steps of getting to whatever the highest star was. They were going to get another rate increase. They made some changes to they did make some of the changes to them. Actually, they didn't even make all the changes, and they had lots of cash freed up. It was a pretty extraordinary story, but they were on track to begin to really get their administrative costs way, way, way down. Anyway, they had a whole lot of new money that they never expected. They were able to open up a new classroom for toddlers, which they had not been able to figure out how to do. The director, who's an expert in early childhood and particularly working with children with disabilities, like she's written a book on it. She couldn't get out of her office before. What she wanted to do was go coach the teachers and make the program better. She had 17 hours a week now freed up to go and work with it. I mean, like the benefits were extraordinary. And so they had a very strong message to tell. I think this comes from Maryland, right? No, this is Nebraska. Sorry, this is Nebraska. So who's doing a couple of in fact, Brandy Lingle from Nebraska is doing a session on overcoming or addressing barriers to providers using technology, something like that. So you might, and again, if you don't get to the session, you can watch the recording. But stop surviving and start thriving. Elevated network providers get the tools and support they need to save time in their day and increase the quality of the program, streamline their business, and make more money. Do you see how they're not saying sign up for our network and you'll get 8 workshops a year, right? It's like not about what I'm doing. What is this going to do for you? And then this comes from another website, increase your revenue and save time. I think that's also a home-based provider network. So you get the idea. What's the service or product offered to your members, either directly? So these are definitions. So this is strategy. So what are you going to do? So what did I say? What's the service or product? Okay. So let's get back to that problem what problem are you trying to solve? So let's say the group of providers, or at least some of the providers that you want to work with, have a problem with collections. They're constantly getting underpaid when they bill for subsidy. They have chronic late payers in their program, families who get really behind and then they drop out and they're sort of left with debt. If that's the problem, billing and collections, what we know is that doing electronic billing helps in a number of ways. First of all, it feels like a real bill. First of all, the bill gets sent, right? A lot of programs don't even send a bill. They don't even send an invoice. So a bill gets sent. It feels like a real bill. There's an easy way to pay it, and providers can stay on top of who's not paid. And if you're using a solution, if you're using a CCMS, most of them, when the family checks the child in, if their tuition is behind, it'll pop up a reminder and say your tuition is due. And that's really nice that the provider doesn't have to say it to them all the time, but it's saying it to them. So a lot of ways that electronic billing will help with collections.
And it helps to strengthen the relationship between the family and the provider. It takes that bill collector part out of it, and you're still asking for the money, but the relationship stays like it's happening.
That's right.
It takes the burden off of the provider to collect the fee, which,
Yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly. And so, but another thing that if you're a network hub, you may want to offer to your members. So we're going to help you set up digital billing so you can get paid electronically, hopefully faster and more fully. But if you want us to handle the delinquent accounts, we can call, right, and make those calls on your behalf. That's another potential service that could help with billing. Removing it even further from the responsibility of the provider, that's going to be a case by case decision about whether you are going to offer that or not. But that's a good point. If the issue is full enrollment, so maybe a service you want to think about providing is centralizing enrollment, centralizing the marketing, and doing waitlist management, so that programs are able to, when they have an opening or an anticipated opening, they're able to get the word out. There's one place for parents to call. They can help schedule tours, like all of those things that go into bringing new families in when you have a vacancy. That might be a service if the problem you're trying to solve is staying fully enrolled. So targets. So what are the short-term changes that you expect to measure among your provider members in order to assess the impact? So these are some examples of how you might measure your short-term impact. So hours worked, right? So and I think these charts, I was going to say, did I do them from, these could apply to either each individual member, or you could do a dashboard for the whole network. And you probably want to do that if you have a hub, you want to sort of see what the impact is. You want to be able to look member by member, and then you want to be able to step back and see how the whole network is doing, right? So there's a whole workshop on dashboards and using business intelligence, which I highly recommend. But so you could track hours worked, you could track overdue payments are here, overall revenue, tracking enrollment. You get the idea. What are you measuring? So as you're thinking about planning your shared services work, or even if you're doing some shared services, take a step back and what data are you getting? Are you getting data? Boy, so if change management is one issue, privacy is the other big issue, right? Oh, my providers don't want to share that information with me. What do you think about that? And that's private stuff, right? So what do you think about that? Allison, you have an idea?
Yeah, we actually did a study this past year. I think you've read it, Sharon, about provider taxes. And, we looked at family childcare providers, and we had 60 tax returns that we were actually able to look at. And it was one of the largest data sets in the country. And, I think what we were able to do from that is to be able to create a rubric for providers to understand, like, what is quality tax preparation? What do they need to know before they go into tax season? We found they were leaving $17,000 in deductions on the table on average. And I think for providers to be able to say, yes, I am, I'm sharing my information, but what am I getting in return? I'm getting these tools to help me save money, to help me, reduce my expenses, and to help me mitigate risks. I mean, there are those providers out there who are willing to contribute to that knowledge base.
Yep.
And are proud to do so.
Yep.
And as part of that evaluation, we actually told their stories, and we said, would you be willing for us to put your name on this? And they said, absolutely.
Yeah.
So there is this empowerment that happens when you ask providers to share and be part of this movement.
Yeah. And I think it's true both for individual business owner, home-based providers, and for center directors. I think for some of them, there is so we have this thing in American culture where we don't talk about how much money we make, right? That's a no-no. You don't talk about that. And I think it's especially hard for people who know they're not making a lot of money, for anybody to know how little it is, right? So there's, shame feels like a big word, but maybe there's some of that there. Somehow, then the other thing is that I have heard a lot is, this is my business, right? And this is private and it's my business and I don't want anybody in my business. Well, but if you hire an accountant, they have to see your books, right? If you'd hired an HR expert, so somehow we have to flip the script so that people feel like as a business owner, I am empowered to hire financial expertise, right? Like I don't do my taxes. I hire the best person to do my taxes. Or what's that company that it always irritates me, that company of tax relief. There's this company that has these, I can hear the jingle in my head, something tax relief. Optima tax relief. It ticks me off because they say, then someone comes on and says, I haven't paid taxes in 15 years. And Optima taxes got me out of my tax burden. And I want to slap them and say, well, I've been paying taxes, right? But the point is that there's not shame. There's not disempowerment in being able to contract with an expert to make your business really strong. Yeah, jump in.
I think you're exactly right. What we've done in Louisiana, which a lot of states have done, is like we responded to the emergencies by like triaging a lot of things by consultant here, consulting contractor here, whatever. And the providers, they're not comfortable. We have a tax consultant and I mean, it's so underutilized. It's a shame. But what it has forced us to do, which is what we already know, is to focus on like the relationship part and to think about all of these services and like incubate them in one, like an alliance or a business office that can serve all of these different capacities, but that's there to stay, to build a relationship with our providers to give them the help that they so desperately need.
Yeah.
It's going to take like a really, forward moving, progressive, really trusting individual or desperate individual to go to like this tax consultant that the Department of Education says that they should use.
Yeah.
And, so.
And you have the double whammy of being related to a government entity, right?
Yeah. So it's tricky, but,
yeah.
Smart enough to know that like it takes a relationship.
Yeah.
And that coaches can help to build that, and then
make
sure they're poised to help with all of these problems.
Excellent. Yeah, that's good. And I'm going to call on you in a second. I just wanted to sort of also piggyback, I think, on Civitas. You also have seen, I think, up close and personal, what happens when people don't hire good tax accountants, right? Like there are a lot of people, there are a lot of professional tax accountants who don't really understand the business of family childcare. I did a listening session for all our kin about 3 or 4 years ago. I had about 12 providers in the room and almost everyone had a horror story. One woman had to pay like $10,000 or $15,000 in fines. And I said, why did you? And she said, you know what? There were so many reasons why I couldn't fight it. And I just had to do it. And it took like 10 years for her to pay off that tax burden. Like it just breaks your heart. That's not right. Back here.
Well, I was gonna say the trust piece, but so I lead a nonprofit organization in Nashville. And so we fundraise the difference. So our parents don't pay it. We offer a sliding scale and we accept subsidies with the state, but neither of which covers the cost of care. So we fundraise it from private foundations, corporations, and such. And just like I would assume a private individual, I wasn't proud of what we paid people. And so, but I realized finally, and a colleague of mine did it on behalf of our two organizations, we shared with our funding community what we paid people.
Yeah.
And I started actually before that with our board. I did a simple chart of what we paid people as compared to a living wage in Nashville.
Yeah.
And I just used the words ethical issue with our board.
Yeah.
That with the board, then gave me the momentum with our funders. And so it doesn't feel great to acknowledge that that's what we were paying people.
Yeah.
But because of the growing attention around the need for living wages, it has helped to take away some of the embarrassment of it. And by which we've been able to raise more money. And now we do pay better.
Yeah.
Still not great, still don't have, we do offer insurance and retirement, but it's not best, but it's allowing us to get there. But it does require that level of trust that I'm coming to them and they're not gonna not fund us because of that. And also to our parents, right? I mean, we do have a small percentage of parents that we allow their children to attend that aren't low income. And so for them, when we can get their heads around it as well, they want those teachers that they love who care for their children to make a living wage. It's almost like we've unleashed like this force within even just the parents. So I do think when you're honest, it doesn't feel great, but I have seen how it has made a positive difference.
Yeah. So we have to shine a light on it. And really, we can't say that we're going to help somebody or move to a sustainable wage if we don't know what their numbers look like. You can't do it, right? So.
Going back on the trust, topic, I think that part of it too is not somebody who hasn't been in their shoes telling them. It's getting providers who did give their taxes to go talk to other providers and say, this is what the experience was like. And also recognizing trauma that may have happened from a previous experience and having to work through that. But even your story, like sharing with other entities, how she had to take that step of vulnerability into that goes way further than someone else just telling you, oh, you should probably tell someone about that, right? And they're like, no.
Right.
So I really think that utilizing the voice of other providers who've gone through the process.
There's no question that's a winning strategy. One more comment, and then I want you guys to practice this. So I'm gonna, go ahead.
Well, you're back there.
Oh, sorry.
Around profitability it's like the dirty word, right? It's not the dirty word in any other business.
Oh, yeah.
But it's the dirty word.
Yeah.
We did focus groups in the fall. It was very interesting because the providers themselves, our home providers, said, we kind of threw out these mission statements, right? That had like strengthen and profitable business, like stuff like that. And they were they were like, yes, it is my business. I want it to be profitable. So we had other focus groups, boots on the ground focus groups, people who are working every day with our providers who said, oh no, you cannot have that in a mission statement or in a statement for the alliance.
Really?
Yeah, it was like, and we didn't do the focus groups, we had an outside.
Interesting.
And she said, I was so surprised. She goes, it was actually kind of gross.
But you needed to know that, right? Because that underlies, if these are people who are supposed to be coaching.
Our food program folks, our Great Search Quality. Some of those folks.
Yeah.
So those boots on the ground folks that are working with, they were like, no.
Yeah.
So very interesting.
Yeah. So go ahead and Ellen.
Yeah, no, it was just a question as you look at the targets and jump into the outcomes. And to a similar point. So I can speak due to my space, right, that we look at using philanthropy and private funding to get folks on board through. And so when you look at the child outcomes, which you're going to talk about in a few minutes, I'm just curious, have you looked at any targets or looked at sort of the investment in quality resources or professional development as a target for shared services that sort of speak to maybe philanthropy who looks at it from a quality space? Just curious.
Interesting. So that's not the focus of what I'm talking about right now, but I think it's an important question. And I'm going to be very honest with you and say that one of the reasons that we talk about measuring impact so much is because very few people are doing it. And we find that we've got to start pushing ourselves. Now, we as a sector, the one place where we started measuring is child assessments. That's sort of the one place where we have some data. So I think it would be fascinating if somebody, hopefully more than one, and I'm sort of looking over here at this side, if some people who are doing good work in the business sustainability could actually start to marry up, how does it, like that whole theory of change that I showed you at the beginning, if you really did make things better for teachers and you could attract stronger candidates and do all of those things, how could it not be better for kids, right? But unfortunately, we haven't collected any of the data yet. I just wanted to show you this. This was that Richmond project. In less than a year, in 11 months, they had gone from spending 48%. This is just their personnel budget. 48% of their money was going to teachers. Now 62% was going to teachers. So now think about the work that had to go into taking their payroll, taking all of the, so it's really easy to say, okay, teacher A, B, and C is in this room and teacher D and E is over here. But then you got to go through your payroll and say, what's the allocation for these folks? To be able to say, in my payroll, I have support staff, I have direct teaching staff, and I have administrative staff. You got to define what those roles are. You got to figure out what their label is. You got to allocate it. How many directors have time to do that? On the weekend, right? Let alone the skill set and the tools to gather the data. This is the kind of business intelligence that can be incredibly important. And when you have a board that's not asleep at the wheel, and you can begin to share this kind of data with them, we can start to really change some things. That was that 52,000. So this was the other part of the brochure. So what success looks like. Again, this was a really early brochure and a project they used to recruit more people. So they had, their collections went from 13% bad debt down to 0 bad debt. This program freed up $52,000 in cash in under a year. And they lowered their administrative overhead. So again, focus on what's the impact? How is this going to affect the folks in your program? So I think, here we go. In a family childcare. So here's some good business intelligence for you. So what happens when you pay attention to the iron triangle? So when you just drive down your vacancy rate and drive down your bad debt, your annual revenue can go from 27 to 41K a year. That's pretty impressive. But you got to be able to tell that story, right? So you got to be able to get the data and then you've got to message it. It's all interrelated. This is from Arizona. I'm not going to, we've talked about this. So I want to give you a few minutes to practice on this, like maybe at your tables. Would you like to do that? Would you like to sort of think about a problem and then just sort of, throw some things out just to sort of get your mind. I'm a great believer that you take in a lot more when you actually interact with the material. Hands-on, this is developmentally appropriate. So just sort of use this as a guide. Talk amongst yourselves. I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to talk and then we'll come back and what obstacles did you, what didn't you understand or what became a challenge or a stopping point? So if you can at your table sort of agree on what problem are we trying to solve? Just pick a problem. And then what do we think are the strategies that are going to help address the problem? What are the short-term things that we're going to measure and what do we think the long-term outcomes are going to be? Okay. I'm just going to get a little more water and then I'm going to circulate. I'll be right back.
Too many problems.
I know.
So I'd love to call you back together for a couple of minutes.
What are they
So you're going to see me walking around with my mask on when I'm not presenting. And the reason for that is because as soon as I leave here, I'm taking my grandson to Disney World and I can't afford to get sick. So that's why. But anyway, so I'd love to know what came up for you in your conversations. What are you still struggling with? What do you have? I'm really just talking right now to raise your hand if you can hear me. You're an early childhood.
That's right. We're looking at a model that has 5 different options, like buying a car.
All right. let's come back together. Does anybody, so you could, you know, you don't have to share the chart in order. But, so I'd love to hear if anybody came up with a problem that they want to talk about, or just in your conversation, what came up for you? What are like struggles, questions, issues, ahas, anything like that? What would you like to share?
Back here.
Yes.
Thank you.
We talked about administrative responsibilities and access gaps. And I think we kind of went the furthest with like access gaps. And some strategies for that. We talked about alternative licensing regulations or like alternative licenses for care, micro centers and employer-based care. Targets, and I don't know if I thought about this right, or we thought about this right, but thought about how that would reduce the number of unregulated sites. So like, you know, I know in Louisiana, we have a big problem where people are caring for children that are not licensed.
Yeah.
So maybe if we have these alternative licenses that are more flexible in the way that they can offer care, more people will be will get licensed. Also thought about micro centers and how that can strengthen business development and underbanked prospective business owners. So like minority women, you know, women of color, people who maybe don't have the credit rating that they need to go to a bank and ask for $250,000 or whatever to have this beautiful new center. They can maybe start with a micro center or something more small scale. And we thought about outcomes being, you know, increased access because the number of sites would increase. These types of sites can pop up in rural communities, in schools. What's the employer-based setting we talked about? Hotels, we're doing a pilot in New Orleans because the huge hospitality industry in hotels at the Louisiana Department of Education. That would be amazing. And also just strengthening families. Like if you know, are in a rural community and you maybe have you're like me and you have children of all different ages and you're dropping off your middle school child, but then you also have a toddler child, that you live in a rural community where there is no center for them to be dropped off to, but your middle school is so forward thinking that they are engaged in a shared service model and allow, you know, a provider to use a classroom to serve toddlers, pre-K children, then that strengthens the family because you're not dropping them off at different places. They're going to the same place. They can see their sibling throughout the day. And then also it takes the unregulated part out of it, concern out of it for the state, where is this 4-year-old going because there's no childcare in the area. So they're, you know, with their grandma or home by themselves or other scary situations. So your issue, the problem that you're trying to solve around, it sounds like it's increasing the number of available slots with some sort of subpoints under it, right? Which is like bringing more above ground care, bringing more licensed and higher quality. So I feel like there are probably 2 questions that you want to go out and ask in your community. One is for current providers. What would it take for you to either add more spaces in your program, or what would it take for you to move into this system? And if you can get really clear about that, boy, that's going to give you a lot of good feedback about the services that you want to provide. But what do you do about people who aren't part of the system who might be? Like, what if you're in an area where you just know that you really want to recruit more individuals into the field? You know, and I don't have the answer to that, but I'm just thinking, like, how do you find those people? And how do you begin to ask them, what would it take for you to do this? And the beauty actually of that strategy is you can sort of start right out of the gate
with expectations about how businesses will be run, using good technology, all of those things. Yeah.
It's so funny, in most communities, parents know where all, like when you're saying like the individuals who may not be inside the circle.
Oh, yeah.
circle.
Oh, yeah.
You talk to parents and they're like, oh yeah, Betty down the street. you
Sure.
know, She's doing this and that, so.
Yep.
One of the things, we've talked about two different things, we did not follow the instructions, but.
I knew you weren't.
But we had really good conversations.
That's good.
So like they totally nailed it. So we talked about the need for a mindset shift, something, you know, that Jerlitha was speaking about, but just this whole idea of our family childcare providers not seeing themselves as small business owners and entrepreneurs and really shifting that mindset. But how do you do that, right? And first is creating a safe space for family childcare providers to come together and get to know their peers and start networking and building that trust amongst each other. And then also building trust with the other entities that are here to support. But like that trust and relationship building is really huge because a lot of our providers are in isolation.
Yeah.
And sometimes that isolation can manifest like lack of trust of outside entities and outside, this is my business, don't get into my business kind of thing. And so
Right.
We at Avance, we've had a lot of experience in creating these peer networks that have transformed like the way that we're doing this work and building first that trust in the peer network and then adding on to it like, okay, now we're going to talk about a business coach. Now we're going to talk about your business practices. Now that we have this trust in this relationship. And now we're going to work on your technology, right? All that kind of stuff, but really building that foundation.
How about now we're going to help you make more money?
Yeah.
Like really cut to the chase.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So the difference between now we want to offer you business coaching and now we want to improve your bottom line.
Yeah.
So, but great, sounds like a rich
There's
conversation.
something about that mindset shift though first. If you professionalize it,
Yep.
if you increase the value mindset,
Yeah,
then I'm more apt to want to say, yeah, I am worth more.
Yes.
I mean, I'm worth making money.
yeah,
And
And what I'm doing is not care. So I know we talk about cost of care.
Yeah.
And it's not cost of education. It's the cost of early childhood education.
Yeah.
I'm always like, it's not cost of care.
Yeah.
It's the cost of early childhood education.
yeah. Good. It sounds like it was a rich conversation, even if you did deviate from the script. Does anybody else want to share anything? We're kind of at time, so we can call it a wrap. Thank you guys so much. If you can hear me on the Zoom app, I'm not sure how much of it you heard. I did see a lot of chat, but don't worry. Everything's being recorded and I actually just confirmed that it's being recorded. So you can see the whole thing from start to finish. So thank you all very much and see you in the next session.